The ground smells like blood and burning wood. Master Sergeant Nicholas Oresco is alone. Around him, the village of Tettingen, Germany, is on fire. January 23, 1945, and the temperature has dropped so far below freezing that the men of the 302nd Infantry Regiment stopped sweating through fear an hour ago. There is no sweat left. There is barely breath. He is pressed flat against a snow-covered embankment, 30 meters from a German MG-42 emplacement that has already killed 2 of his closest friends today. His M1 Garand, the semi-automatic rifle that German soldiers had started calling Die Betrugswaffe, the cheat weapon, is locked in both hands. 8 rounds in the clip. Maybe enough. Probably not. Somewhere behind him, what's left of his platoon has taken cover. His radio is gone. The plan, whatever it was, shattered 15 minutes ago when the Germans opened up from positions that weren't supposed to exist. He has been shot. Not badly enough to stop, but badly enough that every time he drags his elbows forward through the frozen mud, something in his side sends a signal he is choosing to ignore. There are 2 German machine gun positions between him and the objective. His platoon is pinned. His communications are dead. And the last order that came through before the radio went silent was not advance. It was pull back. He didn't pull back. Here is what you need to understand before this story goes any further. The Germans defending Tettingen were not green recruits. They were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had held positions in places that turned other men into ghosts, and their MG-42s could fire 1,200 rounds per minute. Not shots, a tearing. A ripping of air that reached your chest before your brain could name it. 3 previous American assault attempts in this sector had already failed. This position had never fallen. The German commander had walked the kill zones himself, had put stakes in the frozen earth to mark exact ranges, had looked at every approach angle and said, with the calm of someone who had done this many times, "There is no way through." He was wrong. But Oresco would have to prove it in the next 40 minutes, alone, wounded, with orders telling him to retreat, in a battle that would earn him the Medal of Honor. And what the Germans said about him afterward, when they had no reason to say anything at all, was the most remarkable part. They called his rifle cheating, and they had a different word entirely for the man holding it. Nicholas Oresco was born on January 18, 1919, in Bayonne, New Jersey. Not a dramatic place. Bayonne was a working-class waterfront town where the docks smelled like oil and salt, and the families in its row houses smelled like hard work and small savings and the specific dignity of people who build their lives with their hands. His parents were Slovak immigrants who had crossed an ocean looking for something steadier than the old country offered. They found Bayonne. They found work. They built something. Nick grew up watching his father do exactly that. He wasn't loud about it, wasn't the kind of man who filled rooms. Neighbors remembered a quiet kid, careful, observant, the kind of boy who watched a situation before he said a word about it. And when he finally spoke, he usually turned out to be right. Not because he was clever, in the dismissive sense of that word, because he paid attention. He enlisted in 1942, at 23, after Pearl Harbor made the decision for an entire generation of American men. He went to the recruitment office, signed his name, and came home to tell his mother. She handed him a photograph before he left. The two of them, standing outside the house on Avenue C in the gray New Jersey light. She was holding his arm, the way mothers hold the arms of sons they already sense they're losing to something larger than either of them can name. He folded that photograph carefully, the way you fold something you're going to need later, and slid it into the breast pocket of his uniform. He told her he'd bring it back. The men of the 302nd Infantry Regiment called him the Bayonne Icebox. Not because he was cold, because under fire, when everything around him started making the kinds of decisions that pure fear produces, Oresco went quiet, went still. Solved the problem in front of him like it was a math equation that had to come out right eventually, no matter how ugly the work of getting there looked. You cannot teach that. Either a man has it, or he doesn't. By January 1945, the 302nd had been grinding through Germany for months. Oresco had survived Belgium. He had survived the Siegfried Line. He had survived things that never made it into the letters home, because there was no way to write on paper his mother would hold in her hands what some of it actually looked like and felt like and sounded like up close. When the orders came down for Tettingen, Nicholas Oresco was leading his platoon the way he had led everything, quietly, carefully, and correctly, until the plan stopped being correct. This video gives you the story. But the Combat Blueprint, our free newsletter, gives you everything that doesn't fit in a video. Deeper details, forgotten heroes, free to join, 10 seconds to sign up. Link in the description. Now back in the video, Tettingen was not supposed to be difficult. That is what the intelligence said. The 302nd Infantry Regiment, part of the 94th Infantry Division, received the briefing on January 22, 1945. The objective: capture the village of Tettingen as part of the American push through the Saar-Moselle Triangle, one of the last significant German defensive networks in the Western Theater. The intelligence described a reduced garrison, a depleted Volksgrenadier unit, stretched thin, holding more from stubbornness than strength. Artillery would soften the position. The assault force would mop up what remained. That was the plan. Before the plan dissolved, you need to understand what was actually waiting for them. During the night of January 22nd, the Germans had quietly reinforced Tettingen with the elements of a veteran Volksgrenadier battalion pulled back from the Eastern Front. These were not conscripts. These were men who had survived Stalingrad, who had retreated through the Soviet steppe and learned to kill in conditions that hardened them, in ways Western Front combat had not yet matched. They arrived with 2 MG-42 positions, pre-sighted on every viable American approach, their firing lanes zeroed in with the patience of men who had done this before and intended to do it again. Their commander, a battle-tested Hauptmann who had not lost a fixed defensive position in 4 years of combat, had walked every kill zone and concluded professionally that there was no viable path of attack. His preparation was, by every military measure, correct. The assault kicked off at dawn. Within 12 minutes, everything came apart. The German MG-42s opened from positions that appeared on no American map. Not one emplacement, 2. The flanking approach intelligence had marked as clear was in fact covered by a position hidden inside a stone building's ground floor, firing through a slit invisible until the muzzle flash gave it away. By then, it was already too late for the men in the approach column. Orozco's platoon took fire from two directions simultaneously. Men went down. The assault fragmented immediately, soldiers pressing into any cover they could find, trying to do anything that wasn't dying exposed in the open. Then the radio crackled. All units, disengage and pull back to the staging line. Artillery will re-engage. Repeat, pull back. The order made tactical sense. The order was the right call for a unit commander whose men were taking casualties against a position that intelligence had catastrophically underestimated. Orozco was too far forward to act on it cleanly. His platoon pulled back. He watched them go, men he'd led through Belgium, through the Siegfried Line, through things neither of them talked about in letters home. And he made a calculation that no field manual had prepared him for. He had 4 grenades. His M1 Garand with a full clip. His M1 911 sidearm. 1 spare magazine, 7 rounds. 1 wound in his left side, bleeding but not yet decisive. And he was 30 meters from the first MG emplacement. The order said, retreat. He pressed himself flat against the frozen earth. He did not retreat. He was alone now, not by design, but by the brutal arithmetic of timing. Too far forward when the orders changed. Too exposed to pull back without dying in the crossing. Cut off from communication. Cut off from backup. Cut off from everything except the mission, which was still active. Because when the next American wave came forward, with artillery, with a corrected plan, with everything today's assault lacked, those 2 machine guns would be waiting, and they would kill them, unless someone took them now. 1 U.S. Army soldier, 1 uncaptured position. He had the mission. He had his rifle. He started moving. He moved along the ground like he was part of it. The snow was 3 inches deep, but Orozco had learned months ago that the way you survive in the snow isn't to minimize contact with it. It's to accept it completely, to become as flat and cold as the terrain itself, to stop fighting the ground and start using it. The first MG-42 emplacement was in a reinforced pit 30 meters ahead. He could hear the gunner work in his arc, methodical, professional, sweeping the field where the platoon had been. This was a man who had done this before, who had patience and ammunition and the tactical comfort of a position he knew was correctly built. And it was. A prepared firing pit, sandbags and timber on 3 sides, 3-man crew, a clear field of fire extending 300 meters across the main approach. The German Oberfeldwebel commanding this section had fought at Kharkov. He had positioned this MG with one specific purpose: make any individual assault on it unsurvivable. He had never accounted for a man who already knew he was going to be hit and came forward anyway. Orozco pulled a grenade and threw it from a prone position, coiling from the shoulder, sacrificing distance for concealment. The grenade landed short of the pit, in the frozen earth before the sandbag wall. Close enough. The explosion threw snow and dirt in a column. In the 2 seconds before the smoke settled, Orozco was on his feet and running. That is when the ambush hit him. He came around a shattered stone wall, ruins of a farmhouse before the artillery found it, and ran directly into a second German firing position that appeared on no American map. Hidden inside the collapsed structure, 4 German soldiers, prepared, Waiting. A kill zone. The first rounds went past his right ear so close he felt the air move. He threw himself sideways, not backward, sideways, behind a section of collapsed stone, landing hard on his wounded side. His hands went to the Garand, without any conscious instruction from his brain. 3 seconds before they adjusted their fire to the wall. He used 2 to track the muzzle flashes. He used the third to push the Garand over the broken stone and fire. Not careful, fast, the M1 fired, cycled, fired, again. The bolt locked back on the empty clip, and the distinctive metallic ping of the M1. The sound German soldiers across the Western Front had begun to hate, because it meant an American was about to reload faster than bolt-action doctrine said was possible, rang out across the farmyard. The ambush position went silent. What he did in those final seconds, before firing, in the half-second before the barrel came up, made no tactical sense, until you understand what he had already seen. Something no other American soldier on this field was positioned to notice. That answer is coming. But he has to survive what comes next first. He reloaded by feel and kept moving. This is what the M1 Garand gave him that the German K-98K could never match, and what German soldiers had begun writing home about with frustration that edged toward something close to genuine grievance. In a letter captured near the Siegfried Line in late 1944, one Gefreiter wrote to his wife, "The Americans have rifles that fire like machine guns. It isn't right. One of them can send rounds as fast as 3 of us." On the German side of the Tettingen position, at this exact moment, the Oberfeldwebel commanding the defense was on his field radio trying to get a coherent count from his positions. Wie viele Amerikaner? How many Americans? The answer came back confused, contradictory. Einer. Es klingt wie einer. 1. It sounds like 1. He didn't believe it. He ordered them to count again, and in a stone cellar at the northeast edge of the village, an Unteroffizier named Werner Krieger pressed his face against a firing slit and watched the farmyard. Krieger had been a soldier for 3 years. He had a specific, practiced skill, reading a battlefield from movement, sound, and the timing of fire. He watched the farmyard for 90 seconds. Then he picked up his radio and said something that unsettled his commanding officer more than any American artillery had managed that morning. Ich zähle ein Amerikaner. Bewegt sich noch vorwärts. I count 1 American. He is still moving forward. Oresko hit his next obstacle 50 meters into the village, a collapsed ammunition cart blocking the only covered alleyway to the second MG position. Going over it meant standing upright, and going around it meant 25 meters of open ground. He went over it, 2 strides, fully upright, then down on the other side before the MG could reacquire his position. That's when he heard the crying. Not a soldier, not a signal, a child. The sound came from a cellar window at ground level, 3 feet to his right, a sliver of darkness in the base of the building wall. Inside, pressed against the far stone wall, an elderly German woman, a teenage girl, and a boy no older than 5, his face buried completely in the front of the woman's coat. They had been there since before the battle started. They couldn't move, and they were positioned directly in the firing corridor, between Oresko and the second MG emplacement. If the MG opened up on this alley, while Oresko was in it, the ricochets would come straight through that window, His assault plan had one route to the second position. This route. He looked at the terrain. He looked at the woman. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the boy, her hands flat on his back, perfectly still. The stillness of someone who understands that their survival depends on making no sound at all. He pulled back from the alley. He went wide, north, around the building, across 25 meters of open ground with no cover. Staying low, staying patient. Every fold in the frozen terrain cataloged before he moved. He was halfway across when the MG found him. Rounds struck the earth 3 feet left, then 2, then 1. He was into a shell crater, already calculating. Bleeding from a new place now. 1 grenade remaining. 6 rounds in the current clip. His M1911, 7 rounds. And ahead of him, an MG-42 crew that had just locked onto his position. What he chose to do next looked, from any rational standpoint, like the decision of a man who had come completely apart. He stopped. Not because of the wound, not because of the ammunition, though both were real. He stopped because his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He pressed them flat against the frozen earth, the way you press down on something to make it hold still. And the trembling slowed, but didn't stop. For 30 seconds, Nicholas Oresco lay in that shell crater in the snow and was not a soldier. He was a 25-year-old man from Bayonne, New Jersey, who was very cold and very much alone and running out of time. He had heard the radio order, pull back. He had watched his platoon go. He had chosen to stay, and the rational part of his mind was telling him something very clear. The second MG crew knew his position. He was wounded, undersupplied, and isolated. The original mission had been designed for a full platoon with artillery support. He was 1 man, 1 grenade, a rifle with 6 rounds. Stopping was survivable. Continuing was probably not. He reached inside his jacket. His fingers found the photograph, the one from Avenue C. Soft at the edges now, worn from months of being touched and put back and touched again. Through Belgium and France and Germany and this frozen field at the end of everything he'd known. His mother holding his arm in the gray New Jersey light. He hadn't made the promise out loud. That wasn't who he was. But he had made it. And somewhere south of him, his platoon had pulled back to the staging line. And when the next wave came forward, with artillery, with reinforcements, with a corrected plan, they would come through this same ground. And the second MG position, still active, still manned, still pre-sighted on every approach, would be waiting. It would kill them, unless someone took it now. His hands stopped shaking. Not because the fear disappeared. It didn't. But because the choice clarified, became as simple and cold as the frozen ground beneath him. And a man who has truly made his decision doesn't shake. He puts the photograph back. He checks his ammunition. He looks at the gun. He had been watching that MG-42 for 15 minutes. Long enough to notice something that no one else on this field was positioned to see. The thing he was about to do was not irrational at all. He rose from the crater, not crouching, not crawling, standing upright in open ground, 40 meters from an MG-42. Unteroffizier Krieger, watching from his cellar slit, later said he had never, in 3 years of combat on 2 fronts, seen an attacking soldier do what he witnessed in the next 4 seconds. An American soldier, standing fully upright, walking directly toward the machine gun. Not running, not using cover, walking. The MG-42 crew acquired him immediately, and they hesitated. 1 second, maybe 1.5. Their training covered every conceivable assault pattern: running attackers, crawling attackers, bounding overwatch, flanking fire, surrender. It did not cover this. A man walking toward a loaded machine gun with a rifle in his hands and an expression that matched no situation their training had ever described. The gunner looked at his assistant. Something passed between them. Krieger later described it as eine Art Verwirrung, a kind of paralysis. And in that fraction of a second, Oresko dropped to one knee, hurled his last grenade in a flat arc, and was flat on the ground before it landed. The grenade struck the upper sandbag wall. The timber bracing gave. The wall folded inward. He was moving before the smoke cleared. Full sprint now. Garand up, firing as he closed the distance. Each shot cycling without pause. The semi-automatic doing what no K-98K could, while the MG crew scrambled to reacquire a man who was already inside their minimum engagement range. 20 meters, 15, 10. The MG-42 started up again. The rounds went wide. He was through the gap the grenade had opened, inside the position. And what happened next was over in seconds. He stood in the second emplacement, chest heaving, coat dark with blood in 2 places. The gun was silent. The silence spread outward across the Tettingen defense like something physical, like weather changing. The Oberfeldwebel on his radio. Krieger in his cellar. The men in the remaining positions. One American soldier, wounded, alone, with orders to retreat, had taken both positions. Krieger wrote in his diary that evening, "He walked into the gun. Who walks into a machine gun? We had no doctrine for this. No trained response for a man who will not stop. I watched him rise, and I thought, we have already lost." The remaining German defenders in Tettingen began to withdraw. Not by order. Their orders were to hold. They pulled back because the mathematics of the situation had changed in a way their military training had never covered. If 2 pre-sighted MG-42 positions couldn't stop him, what would? Now, the irrational decision. The thing that looked like madness when he rose from the crater and walked upright toward the gun. He had been watching that MG-42 for 15 minutes from the shell crater. Long enough from that specific angle to see something no other American soldier was positioned to observe. The gun's horizontal traverse was fast and smooth. But its vertical depression, its ability to lower the barrel quickly, was slow. A mechanical fault in the mounting, likely from rough overnight transport. A man running or crawling gave the crew time to track. A man standing upright and dropping immediately denied them the downward adjustment time they needed. That narrow window was the only gap in an otherwise flawless defensive position. He hadn't lost his mind. He had solved the equation, the way the Bayonne icebox solved every problem. By watching, by thinking, and then doing exactly what needed to be done. 1 sentence of silence after the last shot. Then he turned, looked south toward the alley, toward the ground-level cellar window. The old woman, Margaret Vogt, was visible in the narrow opening, holding the boy, breathing, the longer route, the exposed crossing, the second wound. They were alive. When the men of the 302nd Infantry came forward into Tettingen, they found 2 fortified MG-42 emplacements, neutralized, cleared by one man carrying only what he'd had when the rest of the unit pulled back. They found his path through the snow. One set of marks. Weaving, dropping, pressing forward, always forward, through a position that had stopped 3 previous American assaults. They found the shell crater, the broken sandbag wall, the grenade damage. Officers walked the ground quietly, carefully, as if examining the evidence of something they didn't fully have the language for. Master Sergeant Charles Pedig, leading the follow-on force, listened to the report. Then he said, "Count the positions again." The soldier counted again. Pedig stood there with his helmet in his hand. One man. It wasn't a question. He just needed to hear himself say it. In the weeks that followed, several survivors from the Tettingen garrison were interrogated by 94th Division intelligence officers. The first question was standard. How many Americans attacked the machine gun positions? The first prisoner, a Gefreiter, who survived from a position on the village's northern edge, looked at the table for a moment. "Einer," he said. "A 1. The lieutenant asked him to confirm. He nodded. He didn't add anything. When Unteroffizier Werner Krieger was processed in early February, he was asked the same question. He said, "Wir erwarteten einen Zug. Was wir bekamen, war etwas, für das unsere Ausbildung keinen Namen hatte. We expected a platoon. What we received was something our training had no name for." Among the German prisoners from Tettingen, a name had started circulating in the holding compound. Not from American sources. The prisoners were using it among themselves. Der Eiserne Einzelne, the Iron One, the Solitary Iron. It wasn't a generic title. It came from a specific moment. Krieger documented it in writing. The moment he watched Oresco rise from the shell crater and walk upright toward a loaded machine gun without cover, without hesitation, and without stopping. "Es gibt kein Wort dafür in unserer Doktrin," Krieger wrote. "There is no word for this in our doctrine. We called him Der Eiserne Einzelne because iron does not flinch. Iron does not negotiate. Iron does not stop." These were not weak men giving reluctant credit. They were Eastern Front veterans, men who had seen combat that would have broken most soldiers, acknowledging that they had encountered something their entire military experience had never prepared them for. Margaret Vogt, the elderly woman from the cellar, was interviewed by a Red Cross worker 2 weeks after the battle. Through a translator, she said, "The American soldier looked at the window before he left, just looked, to see if we were still there." Her granddaughter, the teenage girl, said one more thing the Red Cross worker wrote down verbatim. He knew we were there, and he went around. On July 5th, 1945, President Harry S. Truman personally presented Nicholas Oresco with the Medal of Honor. The official citation reads, in part, "Master Sergeant Oresco, when his company was pinned down by heavy machine gun fire, crawled alone toward the first emplacement under withering fire. Though wounded when he hurled a grenade into the position, he continued his assault and with rifle fire neutralized the emplacement. Then, despite his wounds, he advanced on the second position, which he also neutralized with grenade and rifle fire, permitting his company to continue its advance." Congressional Medal of Honor Society, Nicholas Oresco, 302nd Infantry Regiment, 94th Infantry Division. Action date, January 23, 1945. Tettingen, Germany, He came home in the summer of 1945, and the photograph from Avenue C, worn soft at the edges, folded the same way he'd folded it before he shipped out, came home with him. He gave it to his mother. He didn't explain what had happened with it. He didn't describe the shell crater, or the shaking hands, or the moment he pressed it flat against his chest and let it answer a question he hadn't been able to ask out loud. That wasn't how he operated. She held the photograph. She held his arm, the way she had when she gave it to him. He was quiet for a moment. "I told you I'd bring it back," he said. Oresko rarely spoke about Tettingen publicly. Veterans who know this silence understand it, not as avoidance, but as a form of respect for the weight of it, for the men he didn't bring home, for the truth that the most significant moments of a man's life are often the ones he says the least about. In 2008, at age 89, Nicholas Oresko became the oldest living Medal of Honor recipient in the United States. He passed away on September 4th, 2013, in Teaneck, New Jersey. He was 96 years old. He carried Tettingen with him for 68 years. The capture of the Tettingen position contributed directly to the 94th Division's breakthrough in the Saar-Moselle Triangle, one of the last major German defensive networks on the Western Front. Neutralizing those reinforced MG positions that morning, which had already stopped multiple American assaults, almost certainly saved the lives of the men who would have come forward in the next wave. The M1 Garand, Die Betrugswaffe, the cheat weapon, had been in American service since 1936, and General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised by man. But the weapon is only as extraordinary as the man holding it. On January 23, 1945, that man was Nicholas Oresko of Bayonne, New Jersey. The Germans called the gun cheating. They called him iron. He was given wrong intelligence. The briefing said a reduced garrison, a manageable target, a softened defense. What he found was a reinforced battalion of Eastern Front veterans behind pre-sighted machine guns that had already broken 3 American assault attempts. The plan dissolved in the first 12 minutes. His orders changed when he needed them most. The radio crackled, "Pull back," at the exact moment pulling back was no longer a clean option. He was too far forward. His unit was already gone. The decision had to be made alone, in seconds, in the cold. He faced an ambush designed to kill him. 4 soldiers, prepared positions, a kill zone he walked directly into. He came out the other side in 3 seconds with an empty clip and a reloaded rifle. He chose the harder route to protect people who had nothing to do with his mission. An old woman, a teenage girl, a 5-year-old boy with his face buried in a coat. He went around the alley. He crossed open ground instead. He bled a little more. He almost ran out of everything he had. And the men who tried everything available to stop him, professional soldiers, veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had held this position against everything the Army had sent at them, gave him a name when it was over. Not because they were required to, not because they had anything to gain, because they had no other word for what they had witnessed. Der Eiserne Einzelne, the Iron One. If you are a veteran reading this, you already know this weight. You know what it feels like when the plan is gone, and the orders are wrong, and the ground has disappeared beneath you, and you are left with nothing but what you are at the very deepest level. Some men reach inside and find nothing there. Nicholas Oresco reached inside and found iron. If you are a civilian, understand this. He was not a superhero. He was a 25-year-old man from a row of working-class houses in Bayonne, New Jersey, whose hands shook in a shell crater, who pressed a worn photograph against his chest, and who made a choice. That is all heroism ever is. A choice. In the cold. Alone. When retreating was permitted and sanctioned, and no one would have blamed you. He told his mother he'd bring the photograph back. He kept that promise. He carried it for 68 more years. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss these forgotten stories of extraordinary American courage. Who should we tell next? Drop their name in the comments.